Want to experience games like Diablo 4, The Finals, or Enshrouded at max settings but don't have a PC quite up to snuff? Well, this video sponsor, GeForce Now powered by CloudGG, have got you covered. Their Ultra tier gives you access to RTX 3080 servers, 4K 60fps streaming, support for ultra-wide monitors, and much more. Click the link below to try it for free or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Ever since I started playing survival games, I've been imagining the perfect, totally doable video game. You ready? Here it is. It would combine the world-spanning adventure of The Legend of Zelda, complete with its carefully designed dungeons of yesteryear. It's set in a world not unlike the lands between, massive, mysterious, dense with secrets. Its combat and boss encounters channel the depth and mastery of Monster Hunter's flawless weapon and enemy design. The gear you use to conquer mountains and the threats that dwell within them is gear that you yourself have made, back in the home that you built with your own hammer, using wood from trees that you felled and ore from rocks that you split. And to cap all of this off, the game would feature a compelling narrative, iconic cast of characters, and an all-star voice cast, which is basically just the Baldur's Gate 3 voice cast but repurposed here, because you don't mess with perfection. So that's my idea for a game. Pretty good, huh? Should be pretty easy to make, I think. I'll just go to GDC, wear a t-shirt that says Ideas Guy, find 3 or 4 people who know how to code, 12 to 18 months later, boom, we're millionaires. If Palworld can sell 4 million units in a weekend, then I reckon we got a good shot too. Okay, jokes aside, I really do believe the game I'm imagining will exist one day, but not for a very long time, and not without a development budget of like $400 million. And that's because doing all of that in one game and really nailing each of those components, it's basically impossible. And the only way to make it possible is with an impossible amount of time and money. Having said all of that, Enshrouded is the closest we've ever gotten to what I have described, and made by a small-ish team based out of Germany, this being their first game in this space. It's astounding how much progress they have made towards the impossible goal of making a game that blends Zelda and Elden Ring and Valheim. Because those are the touch points. This is a grand quest set in a broken land that needs you to heal it, and similar to Zelda, it does have lookout towers and a glider, but most importantly, dungeons full of puzzles. The world, which is handcrafted, so not procedurally generated, is stunningly beautiful and unbelievably massive, and like the lands between, every inch of it is brimming with secrets and things worth exploring. You are constantly pulled off track towards some cave, some farmstead, some ruined castle, or just some new wide open expanse trailing off toward horizons unknown. This is also a survival game with some pretty basic core survival systems, but the Valheim style voxel terrain system and some very deep and very flexible building tools allow you to craft a base or bases that look incredible, limited only by your time and imagination. And there's so much more that doesn't fit into any of these buckets. I mean, this supports up to 16 players co-op, it has a class system where you can be a warrior tank, or a healbot caster, or a spell-slinging mage, or a beastmaster, or a rogue, or a survivalist, and on it goes. It's got a grapple and swinging system for a new twist on traversal in a game like this. It's got this whole Enshrouded system where half of the world is covered in this decaying fog, and you can only stay in there for short spans of time, which makes your exploration even more tense than it already was, since a lot of it is kind of on a time limit. There's just so much in this game, and while we're on the topic of quantity, I've put about 30 hours into this, and in that time I've explored maybe a quarter of the map. More than half of the map is still closed off, as this is just an early access build. I really do suspect that playing this game solo as I was, a full playthrough of this has gotta be at least 100 hours at launch, and I would bet it's likely to be a lot more than that. So, if Enshrouded is the closest we've ever gotten to this perfect, impossible game, then why isn't it that game? What's missing? Well, a lot actually, but that's very understandable. See, those other games that I listed earlier, they were all made by massive teams and cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop, and even those games didn't try to do as many things at once as Enshrouded is doing. Enshrouded really does feel like 5 games combined into one, and in order to achieve that, they had to compromise on a number of the core components. So combat is solid and workmanlike, but it's never good, and bosses are very few and far between, and there just isn't much to them. The world is massive and truly worth exploring, but it does start to feel drawn out as various exploration patterns emerge. The survival mechanics get the job done, but they aren't integrated into the core game enough, and can often feel rather superfluous. The NPCs and story are all reaching for something, but after 30 hours of really trying to care about what's going on, there's just not much here worth paying attention to. Here's the thing though, all of those compromises don't bother me because taken together, this package is absolutely working, no doubt about it. I've had an absolutely fantastic 30 hours playing this, and I say that as someone playing solo when the game is unquestionably built to be played co-op. So the compromised elements don't bother me because in each aspect there's enough working to get this over the line. The challenge is that I don't think any of these systems are strong enough to withstand 100 plus hours of gameplay. I look at how big this map is, how much there is to do and see, how many hours it'll take to get through it, and I just think to myself, it's too much. It's been many hours since my gameplay has meaningfully expanded or evolved, and while it's nice to see new locations and fight new enemies, the new biomes I reach aren't demanding new styles of play, be it on the survival side or the core combat. Could I do another 70 to 90 hours of this? I don't think that I could. Enshrouded is a lot of video game, both in terms of the number of things it's trying to do and how much content it's looking to deliver. I really admire the scale of the ambition. It's clearly trying to do many of the things that Zelda and Elden Ring and Valheim do, but structured and paced the way that it is, it's also doing what Assassin's Creed Valhalla was doing, and I think that some focus and restraint during the early access period is going to result in a much better final product. Okay, so let's be really clear on the basics of what Enshrouded is and isn't, because even as someone who's been following this game pretty closely, I was pretty surprised to learn what this actually is when I got my hands on it for an extended period of time. Enshrouded is an action RPG with survival elements set in a handcrafted, voxel-based world. Everything I just said then, and the order in which I said it, is important. This is, first and foremost, an action RPG. The overwhelming majority of the core gameplay loop is exploration, combat, looting, clearing map markers, and slowly peeling back the mystery of this land. You can go for hours without having to engage the survival mechanics at all, should you choose. In this way, Enshrouded feels much closer to Elden Ring and Zelda than it does to Valheim. But it does have survival elements, though the implementation here is fairly light touch. You don't starve or die of thirst, it's extremely easy to get yourself food and water buffs. Building a base is of course possible and the building tools are very powerful, but you can't build out in the wild, you can only do so at one of your bases, and the things you can build don't require a lot of manual input or upkeep, meaning that you're able to spend a lot of time out in the world rather than constantly having to tend to your base. And yeah, the world is handcrafted by the development team. Many survival games opt for procedurally generated worlds to increase replayability, but Keen Games, the developer of Enshrouded, have said that they want to tell a specific story and that the layout of the land is integral to that story. I've definitely seen some disappointment that this isn't procedural, but frankly, having toured about half of this absolutely gigantic map, the fact that it's handcrafted is one of its best features, but we'll come back to that later. And finally, yeah, it is a voxel-based game, meaning that terrain is very easily manipulated with a variety of tools. If you're not happy with a grassy knoll in the middle of your base, you can just remove it. If you're looking to climb up a steep cliff face, then just dig a hole through it. There's very little here that can't be destroyed, and with the world being built the way that it is, it really does add a huge amount to both the building systems and what it's like to explore this land. There is a character creator, it's basic and all the character models look weirdly squat, but it does get the job done. Incidentally, the character you create is not specific to servers, meaning you can take them with you if you want to drop in on one of your friends' servers. What else? The game supports up to 16 players co-op. I was not able to test that many people, only played for a few hours with Stu, but the rest of the time I played solo. When it comes to servers, you can create your own hosted locally on your PC, but you can also use server rental services like Gportal if you want to get something cloud hosted. Speaking of the whole solo play thing, you're probably wondering if you can or should play this solo, and yeah, you absolutely can, because I did. Every encounter is tuned for solo play, all the game systems allow for it. I never at any point felt, oh, clearly this thing that I'm doing is intended for multiple players. Having said that, I do feel like the overall game is built for co-op play. It's kind of inherent to the survival genre, where when it comes to collecting resources and building, many hands make light work. But also, the class design options really do lend themselves to group play, particularly when we start talking about dedicated tanks and healers. If you're thinking about picking this up, I really strongly recommend trying to rope in some mates, as you will absolutely have a better time. but to be clear, it also is a good time solo, for sure. I can personally attest to that. And finally, this release I'm reviewing is the early access build. Only about 1/3 or maybe half of the map is accessible, the rest of it is locked off. There are 4 biomes available at the moment, a collection of rocky bluffs and plateaus, as well as an arid desert. Even though this is an early access build, this is one of the largest early access offerings I've ever seen, and as I said earlier, I reckon a full playthrough of just the early access content will run you at least 50 to 60 hours, and many more than that if you want to go crazy with the building stuff. Alright, hopefully that covers off all of the basics. Now, let's talk about this world. The beating heart of Enshrouded is its handcrafted world. It is the key to understanding what this game really is and why so many of its elements are designed the way that they are. The setup is basic but intriguing. Humanity at one point discovered something they shouldn't have. It brought them great fortune for a time, but when the bill became due, the world was ruined. It's now enshrouded, huge sections of it claimed by a thick fog that rots away anything it touches, leaving behind only dense fungus and decay. There is a way to heal this world, or at least parts of it. In certain sections of the decay, the shroud is being maintained by a shroud root, and filling it will clear the area, giving you a small safe haven in the otherwise hostile expanse of decay. But don't imagine that the point of this game is to clear all of this fog, because you can't. Most sections are permanently enshrouded and there's nothing you can do about that. The point of this game, at least as far as I can tell, is to figure out exactly what went wrong all those years ago, while also trying to build a fledgling new civilization made up of survivors, all of whom were entombed to protect them from the cataclysm, awaiting someone to wake them up, aka you. Enshrouded is definitely trying to do some sort of story thing. The bulk of it is delivered through the lore entries you'll find littered throughout the world. They'll peel back a tiny sliver of the mystery, usually by way of some journal page, or a letter to a regional commander, or a to-do list, etc. You know the drill. I read every single one of these that I encountered. I really properly paid attention to them, but spread out as they are and telling the different stories that they are, it's hard for these to coalesce into something more meaningful. And I don't think that they do. I suspect there's a little bit of FromSoft style storytelling going on here, deliberately circumspect to leave room for your imagination, but it isn't peaking much despite my best efforts to engage it. I would have hoped that the NPCs I'd meet might do some heavy lifting in this regard. Many survival games don't have any NPCs because story isn't a big focus in those games. Right now, Enshrouded has 5 NPCs who will come to live at your base, and while they do have a bit of chat to them, it's definitely not much, and the quests they send you on are basically fetch quests rather than anything more thoughtful or engaging. So I do think that Enshrouded is trying to do a story thing through the lore and through its characters, but it's just not really working, and anyone coming to Enshrouded looking for a compelling narrative is going to be very disappointed. However, Enshrouded is telling a compelling story in another way, and that's through its handcrafted world design. The absolute best moments you will have in this game are not the boss battles or the loot you find, it's accidentally tumbling down a mountainside to suddenly find yourself in dense fog, feeling your way through to chance upon a ruined town that has a hollowed out cathedral at its center. Maybe you head into a small cave which widens out into this massive underground cavern full of enemies, loot, connecting through to a secret dungeon. Perhaps far off in the distance you see a facade of a massive temple, inaccessible to you, but still looming large and telling its own story of a bygone era. Like most other survival games, it's true to say that some of the best stories you'll find in Enshrouded are the ones that you yourself create through your exploits, but that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm saying is that this world is not procedurally generated. Every bit of terrain, every enemy camp, every ruined town and disused temple and ancient relic was put there for a reason, and as you encounter these things, they tell their own story of what this world was before it fell. That's what really lights up your imagination. It's not the scraps of paper, it's the world itself, and I really did love discovering new locations and then trying to imagine what they were once used for, or what life there would have been like in the before times. Interestingly, you don't need to just rely on your curiosity to push you forward here. Remember that this is an action RPG first and a survival game second, and as a result, there's a hell of a lot of map markers up in here. So many that it might even make Ubisoft blush. Now to be clear, the purpose of this game is not to clear map markers in some sort of tick box affair. You can't actually clear most of these markers since they typically don't have an objective attached to them. They're just there to help help you find stuff, and they're kind of necessary because this world is so massive and some of the secrets are so well hidden that it would be very easy to miss them. So how do you unlock these map markers? Well, speaking of Ubisoft, there are big tall towers that you have to climb up. Each of them are essentially a puzzle dungeon where you need to navigate a variety of traps, and then when you do get to the top, a bunch of map markers appear. That's not all though. Most of the map markers you'll find will actually come from exploring the world. So you'll arrive at a salt mine and you'll find a scrap of paper that talks about, where that salt is going to, and then that appears as a new marker on your map to head toward. That's a lot more interesting and satisfying than just the tower thing, as it really does feel like I'm exploring this land on foot rather than just, standing above it and having things pointed out to me. But while I am standing above it, I can also jump into it courtesy of the wingsuit. It's a touch of Far Cry, but used in this setting, it feels much closer to Zelda's glider than anything else. This is a very core tool in your kit bag, giving you so much more freedom to explore this world quickly. A crucial addition, given that fast travel options are limited, there are no mounts, stamina is limited, and so running around the entire map on foot would have been a huge pain in the ass. Most of the time, a new expedition from your base will begin by fast traveling to a tower, jumping off toward your intended destination, and away you go. And structured this way, exploration never feels painful or drawn out, despite how many square miles you're being forced to cover. The other thing that makes exploring this world so satisfying is the voxel terrain thing. It really is satisfying to see a place that you're not meant to be able to get to and just go, fuck that, and then you take out your pickaxe and you dig a hole straight through a mountainside. I've seen treasures locked behind locked gates and said, fuck that, before chiseling a hole straight through the stone wall next to it. On more than one occasion, I've arrived at an objective marker only for it to say location below, meaning that the temple I was looking for is buried deep under the mountain I am now standing on. So I'm supposed to go down to the bottom and look for that lower level entrance, but at that point, you guessed it, fuck that. I take out my pickaxe, I dig a hole straight down, hoping that my pickaxe has enough durability to get me as deep as needed. Spoiler alert, it often didn't, which is why I always carried 2 pickaxes. Pro tip for anyone just starting out. Destructibility is common in survival games, but it's fleetingly rare in action RPGs, to the point where I can't think of any action RPGs that let me do this. It really is a very meaningful expansion of the gameplay loop, and when combined with some incredible locations to discover and explore, plus the mystery of this world and what it might have been before the Shroud took it, the curated nature of this map and how deliberate it all feels, and the ability to move through the world relatively quickly thanks to the wingsuit, exploration is absolutely the high point of Enshrouded. But it does suffer the same diminishing returns that the rest of the package does. After about 15 hours, you've seen everything that the exploration loop has to offer, be it those abandoned towns, camps, mines, and temples, or be it the more curated dungeons or Shroud route encounters. 30 hours deep, I'd liken it to exploring the lands between if the map had only a handful of enemy types and basically no bosses. The scale of the map is impressive, but it does feel empty. And you can use your imagination to fill that emptiness for a time, but eventually your imagination will run out of gas. And while the supporting gameplay systems are solid, they aren't nearly enough to keep you invested in this experience over the longer term. If Enshrouded is going to justify its circa 100 hours runtime, it's going to need to offer a more compelling narrative to unpack, more enemy variety, more boss encounters, and a deeper set of survival mechanics, because as excellent as this core exploration model is, it's not enough to carry this game for 100 hours or longer. There are 3 main pillars to Enshrouded. There's exploration, which we just discussed. There's the survival stuff, which we'll discuss next. Right now, let's talk about the combat. Combat in survival games is often rather incidental to the whole affair. It is of course necessary, as you often need to hunt, or you need to fend off attackers, or perhaps clear out threats guarding a resource node, but combat for combat's sake isn't typical. But Enshrouded isn't a typical survival game. It's an RPG with survival elements. For that reason, combat is a very big focus here, and you'll be engaged in combat far more than you will the game's survival systems. There's a fair amount of breadth to Enshrouded's combat. For example, it has a tab target lock-on system, a parry system, a poise system allowing you to do executions. There's also a stealth system allowing you to sneak up behind targets and backstab them. There's a dodge roll, though I don't think it has any iframes. There's a handful of basic weapons like swords, axes, and maces, each of which have their own animations and combos. There's a bow and arrow, which can also be used with the tab target lock-on system for easy aim, or you can just raw dog it and aim the cursor should you choose. Definitely the better option since that lets you score headshots. Combat feels snappy and relatively satisfying, parry windows are generous, hit detection is sound. Generally speaking, I'm able to comfortably handle enemies many levels higher than me, so long as I play smart and I don't mess up any of my blocks or parries. So it all works well, but it is very simple. It's definitely more sophisticated than Valheim's indiscriminate swing animations and glitchy parry windows, but Dark Souls this ain't. I'd liken it to Zelda's combat since the lock-on targeting system is similar, but also the fact that there's only one combo for each weapon and the overall mechanical skill ceiling for combat is very low. The difference here though is that there's actually a lot more combat in Enshrouded than there was in the recent Zelda games, and because it's not particularly deep, it does start to wear out its welcome. Enemy design could help alleviate this, but it's fairly limited, at least in this early access build. It's by no means bad, in fact it's no worse than what you'd find in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom really, but I'd say those games were hardly the high watermark for combat systems, and the most interesting combat to be found in those games usually involve picking up something heavy and dropping it on a moblin's head, something you sadly cannot do in Enshrouded. But you can do a bunch of other stuff, namely spell sling and magic stuff. You can equip staves and wands, and you can become a full-time caster should you choose. I never did much of this since I found the melee stuff more reliable in a solo context, but the option is definitely there. There's also a whole class-based system enabled by both your gear choices and your talents. On the gear front, there are gear sets that will increase your stealth damage or are focused on HP and survivability, enabling a tank build. When it comes to talent choices, you can opt for different perk paths that will lead you to stuff like a two-hander focused barbarian build, or allow you to become a dedicated heal bot, or a beastmaster able to passively recruit nearby animals to help you during combat. There's some really cool ideas in there, but none of them are particularly breakthrough, not that they really need to be. A lot of the benefits of these build types is the way that they support group play. And it would be pretty rad if you played a tank and your buddy was a healer and your other mate was a ranger and another one was a cheeky wizard. Almost no other survival game lets you do that, and that's just straight up cool. Like I said, I played solo and I still had a great time, but I know I would have had a lot more fun had I been able to lean into the strengths of this class system with an organized party. But at the same time, combat does not require much coordination. I do wonder how much work there would be for a healer to do, especially given how few bosses there are and how basic their designs are. I played for 30 hours, and in that time I fought 3 bosses. All of them were just kind of meat sacks. They had some abilities, sure, but not many. And given how few of these bosses there were, it would have been nice if there were grander, more spectacular fights with some more mechanical depth and complexity. Here's the bottom line when it comes to combat though. It's fine. It gets the job done. But it alone is definitely not a reason to pick up and play Enshrouded, any more than Valheim's combat is a reason to play Valheim. There's just not enough here, and again I come back to that point I've made a few times, and it's similar to the point I made when I reviewed Valhalla. 30 hours with this combat is good. 100 hours with this combat will be not good, I suspect. Unless there are some new combos, some new enemy types, new boss mechanics, or new, more impactful perks, I think that the overall combat framework would run out of puff well before you reach the upper limits of this gigantic map. I think the most interesting thing to talk about when it comes to Enshrouded is its approach to survival mechanics. This is a genre that can often feel really painful and clunky and grindy, and doing anything just has so many steps and it takes so long. I think that's a really bad part of the survival genre, and every new good survival game that comes along seems to shave off a little bit more of that laboriousness in an effort to welcome in a wider group of players. Enshrouded has shaved off a lot of that laboriousness, such that the survival mechanics are really light touch and you can kind of just ignore a lot of them. But I do think that Keen Games went a little too far with their razor, and right now the game's survival systems aren't pushing back hard enough against you, making the whole experience lose that tactile feel that survival games are often known for. So survival mechanics usually fall into 2 buckets: stuff you have to do regularly to survive, so stuff like food and water, etc., and stuff you can craft or build, like housing or a blacksmith or that sort of stuff. You don't need to do anything to survive in Enshrouded. You do not die of starvation or thirst, Similar to Valheim, food and water provide buffs that ultimately become necessary buffs as you move into more hostile environments where you'll need more HP or more resistance to the Shroud. The thing is, the food you might need is so readily available that you barely need to think about it. You are constantly being bum rushed by wolves and boars providing you an endless amount of meat without any effort at all. There's edible berries and vegetables everywhere. The only way to cook food, at least for the moment, is over a fire, and you can't combine more advanced ingredients to make more powerful food. Water is endlessly available from wells you find, and there doesn't seem to be anything else in the game you can drink. Furthermore, you don't need to sleep, that is optional, and there aren't any extreme weather conditions necessitating things like light clothing in the desert, or hopping between patches of shade to keep your temperature down. I'm unsure if stuff like that will come later. I do see some frosty mountains in the distance, so perhaps it's there, but for now, it's not. Health is also extremely easy to get back, since bandages are effectively infinite given their low resource cost. I'm always walking around with like 20 bandages, each of which will restore 50% of my health, so yeah, I never really feel like I'm nursing injuries, desperate to recover after a tense scrape. See, I know a lot of people find these sorts of onerous requirements quite annoying and cumbersome, and if that's you, then you are probably going to love Enshrouded's more convenient and streamlined approach to survival mechanics. For me though, there's a balance that I personally seek. I want these systems to kind of tug at me a little, because often the tension that these systems create can produce the best moments. Some of my best memories in Valheim were the way that I was able to push through the poisonous swamps, or keep myself warm when mining on a mountainside, or the scrounging for resources when I suddenly realize I'm out of vital food buffs and a horde of trolls is bearing down on me. I never felt at all pressured by Enshrouded survival mechanics, and most often I was kind of ignoring a lot of them because they really didn't need to be factored into my thinking. So the other side of the survival equation is the building stuff, and it's got to be said that the building tools on offer here are really something. You can use the voxel system to alter the terrain in any way you see fit, building a mountain out of a molehill should you choose to do so. You can select from a number of set shapes like walls, doors, window frames, pillars, beams, etc. And then you can select the material type for that shape. And there are a lot of material types, from mossy rocks to rough cut rock to clean cut rock to luminous rock to copper to metal to clay to God knows what else. I've already unlocked, what, 10, 15 different building materials, and there's no sign of that slowing down, and all of these can be applied to any shape I want to make, meaning that the ability to create some fantastic, unique looking structures is almost unlimited. In my base alone, I had a bunch of log cabins, a wood paneled main house, a rough cut stone complex for my blacksmith, and a creepy bone blocked house for my alchemist. If there's one thing I'm going to be regularly checking back in on, it's the Enshrouded subreddit, because I'm very excited to see the sort of building porn that the community is going to create. But similar to the survival systems, what you can build doesn't require a lot of manual input or upkeep. It's very set and forget sort of stuff where you can just queue up huge amounts of resources in the smelter, go adventuring for an hour or two, and come back to find more copper bars than you're ever going to need. This does actually make sense here, because this is a game that wants you to be out in the world exploring, but I still can't quite shake the feeling that a lot of what I build is just for its aesthetic purpose. In games like Valheim or Subnautica, most of what I build had both form and function. New equipment I laid down or new extensions I built to my base felt very important, like worthwhile expansions of what I could do, and the way that expanded capability was represented in physical space was really satisfying. Enshrouded doesn't ever land that part of the equation. You can build a very pretty base, but if you want to build basically no base, then you can do that too. Either way, that tug isn't there, and I kind of need a little more of that in my survival games. Finally, one big missed opportunity is that you can't build out in the open world. You can lay down new altar stones which allow you to construct a new base, but you can't build when you're outside of the limits of your base. That's a bummer for when you chance upon a really rich mineral cave and you want to quickly erect a mining camp, but to be fair, outside of that, I haven't much felt the need to build things on the move. Often that desire comes from more demanding survival systems that force you to quickly erect shelter for the night, or a workbench so you can repair your equipment. With the ability to instantly fast travel back to your base at any time, the need to build out in the wild is pretty much removed, which kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier about the tug of these survival systems. Tuned the way that they are, Enshrouded survival systems definitely reinforce the idea that this is an action RPG first and a survival game second. I actually can't fault them for that, I really can't, and I think that people who find themselves worn out by survival games might really appreciate this overall calibration. For me personally though, I just found it too streamlined. I need Enshrouded to push back on me a little or a lot harder than it currently is, and just as I hope that exploration and combat are deepened and broadened, I hope that the survival systems also get some love during this early access period. So this has been a 30-minute review for an indie survival game launching into early access, and at this point you might be like, come on man, they're still working on it, you're a bit harsh on your criticisms, right? But I would actually flip that and be like, the reason that I spent this long talking about this game and providing this much feedback is that I really like what this already is, and I'm really excited about what it could eventually be. If this game was shit or it had no long-term prospects, then I would not have made this kind of video. This really is a pretty remarkable product that is a very rough prototype of a game I've long wished existed. This combination of adventuring and exploration and lore and characters and dungeons and bosses and survival and combat and crafting and building, it's like a fever dream wish list of stuff, and one day someone's gonna figure out how to do all of this at once and do it well. And when they do, I suspect they'll look back on Enshrouded as one of the stepping stones in their journey toward it. That's why I'm already really invested in what this is and what it could be at the end of its early access period. Enshrouded has so much promise, but right now, its competent but basic systems are spread far too thin across a map size that seems unreasonably and unnecessarily large. If each of the components could be strengthened and the overall scale reined in, I think this could be really special and would serve as not only a stepping stone towards something great, but would be great in and of itself. I certainly hope Keen Games are able to get it there. I will be cheering from them very loudly from the sidelines. Alright Aussies, we've had GeForce Now powered by CloudGG for a while now, and it's always been fantastic because it is the most affordable path into PC gaming, completely removing both the upfront costs and the ongoing costs associated with maintaining and upgrading your hardware. If you're unfamiliar with it, GeForce Now is a powerful gaming platform that lets you play hundreds of games through the power and magic of the cloud, meaning you can play those games on your TV, your old outdated PC, your tablets, and even your Apple devices. This is possible because GeForce Now does all of the graphical processing in the cloud and just beams you an image, similar to something like Netflix. So if you have an internet connection at 15 megabits per second or higher, you can start playing games through the cloud on almost any device through either a dedicated app or through a web browser like Apple Safari. It's been available for a while now and people have loved it, but recently CloudGG made a massive upgrade to their infrastructure, one that really transforms this entire cloud gaming experience. Their new Ultra Tier membership is the first time you'll be able to experience RTX 3080 servers. This means you can get up to 4K 60 FPS or 1440p at 120 FPS. That 120 FPS number is significant because many modern TVs support 120 FPS. So you can play Cyberpunk on your TV at that frame rate if you want to, without needing to spend hundreds of dollars on a console or thousands of dollars on a high-end PC. But GeForce Now powered by CloudGG isn't ever resting on its laurels, it's always getting better in a variety of ways. At CES in Las Vegas earlier this year, Nvidia announced a bunch of new titles coming to the service, namely big Blizzard titles like Diablo 4 and Overwatch. Incidentally, Diablo 4 supports ultra-wide, and so does GeForce Now's Ultra Tier, and Diablo 4 also is about to get ray tracing, which is also supported by the Ultra Tier. So you could buy a $4,000 or $5,000 PC to play Diablo with ray tracing, or you could just use your existing TV or tablet or monitor, you subscribe to GeForce Now's Ultra Tier, and boom, you are immediately experiencing cutting-edge visuals for a fraction of what you would otherwise spend. Best of all, you don't have to buy your games twice. These games are pulled from your existing libraries, be it Steam, the Epic Store, or Ubisoft, meaning that you can continue to buy games wherever you please, but play them through the power and convenience of GeForce Now. There is a free trial available all the time, allowing you to test this for yourself, and for less than the price of a cup of coffee, you can get a full month of the basic tier membership, giving you the chance to stream games on the fly with ease. If you find yourself loving it and using it often, you may want to check out that Ultra Tier, giving you next-gen features like ray tracing, 4K 60 FPS, and ultra-wide. PC gaming is, I think, the best way to go about it, but the cost of entry is often intimidating, and you have to worry about upgrading your hardware and troubleshooting issues, etc. If you want to get into PC gaming without any of the cost or hassle, then GeForce Now is absolutely the way to do it, allowing you to play hundreds of PC games with ease. You can try it for free by clicking the link below. Thanks GeForce Now powered by CloudGG for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.